Have you ever gone through a season so heavy that you felt completely lost? Like you're walking down a dark road with no idea if you're even heading in the right direction? One of those trials that feels like it will never end, where the only light you see feels so far away, you start to wonder if it's even real. You smile when people ask how you're doing, because that's what they expect. But late at night, when it's just you and your thoughts, the questions creep in. Did God forget me? Will I ever feel joy again? Paul understood this better than anyone. He endured things that would have broken most of us, trials so intense they seem almost unimaginable. But God will never give you more than He's already equipped you to handle, right? You see, Paul's story didn't start with him being the hero of the faith we know today. In fact, it was the complete opposite. Before he became Paul, he was Saul, a man who went out of his way to hunt down Christians. To him, the followers of Jesus were a threat, and silencing them became his mission. But then, on the road to a city called Damascus, everything changed. Jesus himself showed up, stopped him in his tracks, and called him out, "Why are you persecuting me?" In that moment, Saul's life flipped upside down. The man who tried to shut down the gospel became Paul, one of the loudest voices to spread the message of Jesus. Paul planted churches, preached the gospel, and brought hope to countless people. But let me tell you, this new life didn't come without a cost. He faced beatings, imprisonment, betrayal, all because he chose to do the right thing. And isn't that the reality for so many of us? Sometimes the hardest battles we face aren't because we've done something wrong, they're precisely because we're doing something right. You stayed honest. You held on to your integrity. You refused to compromise. And still, you face rejection, criticism, and attacks. Do you know why this happens? Because the enemy only goes after what's valuable. He doesn't waste his energy on someone who isn't a threat. If you're walking in God's will, the enemy will try to stop you. But listen to me, nothing can derail the purpose God has placed on your life. Nothing. So the man who once hunted others for their faith found himself hunted. Paul was chained as a prisoner on a ship, headed to Rome to stand trial for doing the right thing. But God had a purpose for Paul on that ship. Something bigger than Paul, bigger than the ship, bigger than Rome itself. But for that purpose to come to pass, Paul had to go through a storm. A storm so fierce it left them hopeless, the kind that makes you question if you'll even survive. It started with strong winds, tossing the ship back and forth like a toy in the hands of the sea. The skies grew dark, the waves rose higher, and soon they lost all control. The storm raged for days, so long in fact that they couldn't even see the sun or the stars. They didn't know if it was day or night, where they were, or which direction they were headed. The sailors did everything they could to survive. They threw the cargo overboard. They tied ropes around the hull to hold it together. But no matter how hard they tried, the ship just kept breaking apart. And isn't that how we are sometimes? We try everything we know how to do. We fight to hold our plans together, to keep things from falling apart. But sometimes, God allows the storm to rage, not to destroy us, but to get us to our destiny. Fear spread like wildfire through the crew, and hope began to fade. But right in the middle of the chaos, when all hope was gone, Paul stood up and spoke words no one expected to hear. "Keep up your courage, because God said to me that we'll all survive, only the ship will be destroyed." Can you imagine how that sounded to everyone else? Paul was telling them that the very thing they were depending on to survive, the ship, was going to break apart. I imagine they must have thought, there's no way we can make it without the ship. And that's exactly what might be going through your mind right now. The one thing you've been holding on to, the job, the relationship, the plan you had for your future, feels like it's falling apart, and now you don't know how you'll survive without it. But listen to this. Sometimes God allows the ship to break so you can learn to trust Him, not the ship. God is saying to you today, my child, to tell the testimony I'm preparing for you, you're going to have to go through this storm. Yes, it will break your ship. Yes, it will turn your plans upside down. You may lose the one thing you thought you needed, but my purpose for your life is still intact. Your ship might break, but you will survive. You and everyone with you will survive. Your family will survive. Your purpose will survive. And when it's all over, they'll see that you came through this storm stronger than ever, because I will restore double what you lost, and you will tell everyone what I did in your life. And just as God said, the ship broke apart. The waves crashed against it, tearing it to pieces, but not a single life was lost. All 276 people on board made it to safety on an island called Malta. Exhausted, drenched, and freezing, they were met with unexpected kindness from the islanders. These strangers began helping them gather wood to build a fire and keep them warm. For a moment, it felt like the storm was finally over. But just as things seemed to settle, something else happened. While Paul was gathering sticks to keep the fire going, a venomous snake, hidden in the wood, latched onto his hand. The people around him gasped. They stared at Paul and began to whisper. They thought the snake was a sign that Paul was a bad man and that fate had finally caught up with him. They stood there, watching, expecting him to swell up, to collapse right in front of them. When you're in trouble, it seems like no one steps in to help, but everyone has something to say. They look at you, they point fingers, they question your character. But what did Paul do? He didn't argue. He didn't explain himself. He didn't panic. He simply shook it off. He shook the snake off into the fire and went about his business. And while they stood there waiting for him to fall, nothing happened. Nothing. So listen to me. They will stand there and watch you, and they will be surprised that you made it. The same people who doubted you, who whispered about you, will have to admit that God's hand is on your life. And what happened next? Paul didn't stop. He went on to heal the father of the island's leader, and soon all the sick people on the island were brought to him, and they were healed too. God used the very place of his trial, Malta, as a platform for Paul's greatest testimony. Do you see it now? God turned the storm into a story of survival. He turned the snake into a story of resilience. The ship may have broken, but Paul didn't. The snake may have bitten, but it couldn't stop him. And the same God who brought Paul through the storm and protected him from the bite is the same God who's writing your story right now. The battle you're in today is the setup for the testimony you'll share tomorrow. The enemy's attacks won't destroy you. They'll only prove God's power in your life. Because the power that raised Jesus from the dead is carrying you through this season. So don't give up. Don't stop believing. Shake off the lies, shake off the fear, and keep going. God is turning your trials into the most beautiful story of your life.